Hi, I'm Peter Capaldi. I play the Doctor, and you're watching EMS Productions.
Hello everyone, welcome along to this week's Doctor Who review video, where today I'm going to be looking back at the slightly unspectacular, I think you would say, The Woman Who Lived. Now I'm going to say that this review will probably be a bit shorter than my usual ones, which are usually sort of somewhere around 30-40 minutes. I'd be surprised if this gets past 20 minutes simply because there's not that much to talk about for this episode as far as I'm concerned, really, so it might turn out a little bit short, but hopefully it'll still be a good one. Well, at the crux of this story, it's essentially a character study of Ashilda, or me, and what immortality has done to her and how it's changed her over 700, 800 years, is it, since the Viking episode? Actually, I've got a problem with that as well. But so it's kind of, that part of the story is very well done, giving you, with Catherine Tregenna, of course, coming in to write for Doctor Who for the first time, having written some great tortured episodes. And she writes that very well, that part of the story about Ashilda and how she's changed. Well, she doesn't even remember that she was Ashilda. And I think, and it's also a nice idea to sort of differentiate her, because Ashilda is a very different type of immortal to Captain Jack, to what we had there, because obviously he still has all the memories, whereas Ashilda loses them after a few years because she's just human, whereas Jack's something else that I can't remember what race. He's from somewhere, isn't he? I can't remember exactly, but he can remember everything, whereas she can't. I think that's a nice difference to make her a properly different type of immortal character, and not just completely just another Jack Harkness. So that was a nice way to do it. And you also see in this episode how all these years of just watching other people die and her living on has really sort of hardened her to the world, if you like, and how she doesn't really have any feelings almost left. She's just this kind of sort of slightly miserable woman who's got no one and nothing really, and she's just, and that's why of course she's so desperate to go with the Doctor, for her to be taken somewhere better than Earth in the 1500s, where it takes a day to get to Kent, as she said, which is not the most fun, I would imagine. And so it's all, that part of the story is all very well done. There's not really that much to say about it. I think it's kind of just, you watch it and it's really good while you're watching it, but I feel like I'm just, there's no point in just repeating all the lines they say in the episode. So I feel like just sort of watching that part of the story is very good and very interesting. It's a different kind of Doctor Who. It's very much talky Doctor Who, if you like, which some people, probably kids, don't like so much. And I can imagine kids didn't particularly enjoy this episode, because a lot of it is just talking, mainly, which, if you're in the right mood for it, which I usually am, and was when I watched it last night, it's a very good, that part at least is very good sort of story. But if you kind of just want a bit of fun, then it's not the most enjoyable story, really, I think it's fair to say. So there's not that much more to say on Ashilda, although actually I was going to say that another sort of where she differentiates from Captain Jack, I think I've got this right, is that her sort of immortality is slightly different in that she can still die, whereas Jack physically couldn't die. I mean, Jack comes back to life every time he dies, whereas, as far as we could tell, Ashilda doesn't age, and if she gets any sort of illnesses, they'll sort of repair themselves, but if she was shot, she would probably die. Or was like shot in the heart or something, then I think she would actually die. She wouldn't do the old Captain Jack sort of thing where he kind of, that we've seen so many times, where he comes back to life. I don't think that's how it'd work with the children. That's why she says, that's why the Doctor says you're not indestructible or something, isn't it? Whereas Captain Jack very much is indestructible. And that's probably why Sam Swift isn't at the end of the universe, because he probably got himself killed. But I don't know, in Hellbent, what happened to Captain Jack, where at the end of the universe we were meant to expect the company of immortals or something, wasn't it, that me or she would have said, and yet Captain Jack wasn't there, and yet he can't die, so where did he go off to? I mean, it's the end of the universe, so surely there's nothing else left in the universe, but Jack doesn't die, so that was an interesting one. They should have brought him back, really, but I'm sure you could find an explanation for it, or just make up some story where he actually died. Well, he could have just died in Miracle Day, couldn't he? But he didn't. Oh, I need to finish that now. Last episode next week. Looking forward to that. Because I think the last few episodes of Miracle Day aren't that bad, actually. I think they're better than A lot of it is pretty poor, yeah, but I don't think it's all terrible. I mean, the first couple of episodes are alright, and the last couple are alright. It's just the filler in the middle that's really not good. Well, actually, episode 5 is quite good, but other than that, anyway. Stop talking about Torchwood. This is Doctor Who. We're talking about the woman who lived, woman who lived and is very miserable and depressed, pretty much, and that's why she wants to go with the Doctor. So that's pretty much all there is to say on Ashilda, I think. Because it's sort of stuff where you just watch the episode and you get the interest there, rather than me really telling you everything. I think that's how this episode kind of works. Well, I've talked about the sort of better side of the story, if you like, which was looking at Ashilda and how immortality has changed her. And now I'm going to focus on the pointless plot, as I like to call it, which was Lenny the Lion, or Leonardo the Lion from Delta Leona, who was a Leonian. Could you get any more he's a lion than possible? I mean, that's just like a joke, really, isn't it? That name in itself is clearly a joke already, and so it just seemed clearly, to make a proper episode of Doctor Who, you have to throw in a pointless alien to make the kids happy, and a silly little plot about finding some alien artifact that will get him back to his people or something. And that was all just very unnecessary. I mean, if this episode, going back a few years, but if this episode was in Torchwood, maybe like the first couple of series of Torchwood, then I don't think we would have had that plot. I think it would have been focused purely on the Doctor and Ashilda. But I think just because Doctor Who's got to appeal to kids as well, that they had to chuck in this stupid lion with this. I quite like his voice, actually. I don't know why. I find it quite funny, his voice. Not quite sure why. It's a bit of just all this really deep lion-y voice that I've done a bad impression of again. I really stopped doing impressions. But so Lenny the Lion is, and he has a pointless sort of, and Ashilda seems so stupid to just not realise that that the lion's going to betray her. I mean, it's so obvious that the lion is going to betray her from the very beginning. That's just how it works on Doctor Who. Clearly she needs to be told she's in an episode of Doctor Who, so she's going to be betrayed. And it would kind of help if she was, so then she could. So then, obviously, the standard looks like the lion or the alien. Looks like the alien threat is going to win. They've opened up. It's all going wrong. Someone's died, and what does the do? What do we do? Ashilda realises that she's actually not very nice, and that she should be nice, and she should care about all the people who are dying. And so the Doctor saves the day. Well, Ashilda sort of saves the day, but the Doctor kind of tells her to save the day. And we all live happily ever after. Sam Swift's immortal. The lion gets disintegrated for some reason, and we stop caring about him. So that was all a fairly disappointing part of those stories, I think. That you just had this unnecessary plot with the lion trying to get back to his people or something, but actually it was kind of, well, wasn't it like to sort of a portal out of this world to travel into the universe? I think is what Ashilda was saying, something, because she wants to get away from it. So this was her exit ticket rather than the Doctor, because he wouldn't take her. And so I guess that's kind of, so then they opened it up supposedly to take her away, but clearly it's just for Lenny the Lion to get back to his people. But they fail at that, and he dies. And that's pretty much it for the story. I mean, that's it, really. There's nothing much more on the actual story terms to say about it, because it's such a simple plot, really, that doesn't need anything interesting to it at all. At one point when I was thinking about this again, I was watching it, when you get the opening sequence where Ashilda reveals herself to the Doctor, and supposedly that's meant to have a massive impact on us, I think that this would have worked better, and it would have been easier, and because she's changed so much from last week as far as we're concerned, when you watch it first time, I feel like it's slightly more difficult to sort of roll with the she's changed completely, it's been so many years. So I think it might have been better if these episodes hadn't been back to back and they'd been split up a bit more. I was thinking about this, maybe how to sort of the optimal scheduling for series 9, and I sort of came up with this idea. I'm not certain whether it would work, but maybe you want to stick The Girl Who Died as the premiere, as the opener of the series, because it's a one-parter essentially, and it's not less complicated. It's not more complicated than the Davros opener that you could have had there. And so I feel like what you could have done is you would have had The Girl Who Died, then the Underwater Base two-parter, and then you have the Magician's Apprentice, which is really the Davros two-parter. Then you have the Woman Who Lived, so you've had a full 5 weeks between the girl who died and the woman who lived. They've travelled around a bit, and it really feels like they've got somewhere, and that it's actually sort of, and that actually some time has properly passed between the episodes. And then I think that would have given a better effect and made it easier to sort of think about her having changed so much in all these years, because it would have felt like it's been about a fair amount of time. Where when you have them next to each other, I just don't, in my opinion, I don't think that really worked that well. And so I think it would have been better if they just mixed it up, because they clearly couldn't push it any later in the series, because you have to have the Woman Who Lived before Faith the Raven, obviously. And you don't really want to put that back to back with Face the Raven, so you've got to have it before Sleep No More. But then, really, you don't want to have it too close to Face the Raven, because it's sort of such a different time zone again. So you have to have it before the Zygon two-parter. And then suddenly you're stuck at episode 6 at the latest. So really, they should have then thought, let's put the girl who died as episode 1 or 3. I think that would have worked a lot better, in my opinion. And so that's just a small criticism that could have made the series even better if we kind of did it if they just sort of showed the episodes, scheduled them slightly differently, I think. But it's only a minor thing and didn't have a huge effect. It just sort of was an observation, I guess. And one thing, coming back to sort of Ashilda and that bit, that I did notice in this episode was it's a pretty dark episode, let's be honest. Not just literally, obviously, it's quite lots of dark scenes. But in terms of sort of the content of Ashilda losing her children, we actually see that sort of shot of her breaking down there in the sort of, in front of like all the sort of cots where her babies were or something like that. And that's all pretty hard-hitting stuff, really, that she's lost her children. That's pretty, for Doctor Who, that's pretty deep, I think, and we don't see that sort of thing very often. So it was nice to see again, as this sort of series showed Doctor Who being a bit more grown up generally. Clearly they don't do it fully when you have to chuck Lenny the Lion in as well to make it an interesting story, supposedly, but I think that's good, touching these themes which are bound to happen with her, that she's gonna, well, clearly her children died rather than her outliving them, but either way it's not going to be the nicest of feelings for her. So I think it was good they actually tackled that and didn't just sort of leave it and focus on more wishy-washy stuff relating to her, that was good. Now, one more thing I'll mention before I mention Clara is Sam Swift the Quick, played by Rufus Hound. He's this sort of stand-up comedian of the 1600s, essentially, who's put to death and doesn't die and becomes immortal. Yeah! I mean, he has a few funny, good jokes with the Doctor when they're standing. I quite like that scene when they're standing, when he's standing up there about to be killed and the Doctor's sort of coming towards him and they're just sharing a few jokes, a bit of stand-up comedy there. From all the like behind-the-scenes footage, it does look like it was a bit of a laugh, those scenes, when they were filming those scenes on that stage with that crowd and stuff. It does look like they were just having a messing around for most of it, frankly. At least from what we've seen, it kind of looked fairly entertaining, so that must have been. And it makes the scene entertaining itself anyway, and so that was just a nice moment for the episode. And of course Sam Swift becomes immortal, but clearly he doesn't live that long. He probably goes and gets himself killed somehow, because we never see him again. And so there you go, we're not too bothered about him really. And that's just, yeah, that's him pretty much, not much more to say. So the last major thing to mention is Clara, and the lack of Clara, and the foreshadowing of Clara in this episode. So, well, firstly I'll tackle the foreshadowing of Clara's demise in this episode when Ashilda mentions to the Doctor when they're climbing up the chimney about she'll leave you, she'll blow away like smoke. Just another reminder that actually she's not immortal, you know. You could make her immortal, but he doesn't want to do that, does he? And well, I guess once she's died he'd do anything to do that, really, wouldn't he? Sorry. And so that was a nice moment, foreshadowing the end of Clara, because, well, we all knew it was coming at this point, because it'd already been announced, and so just throwing these nice little nods to her death, or something bad happening to her at the end, let's say, because she does. Well, let's leave the does she, doesn't she die for the end of the series. But for this one, it's a nice, just sort of making the Doctor think again, I think, and that's why we get these sort of moody shots at the end of the episode with the Doctor looking slightly concerned and a bit fierce at Clara at the end of this one and at the end of Zygon Inversion. He's just sort of doesn't look too happy, and he's just sort of thinking about what it will be like to not have her there, I think. And, well, I hadn't noticed it until recently, But in that scene in the TARDIS at the end, the most wonderful foreshadowing I'd ever seen that I hadn't noticed before is when Clara steps into the TARDIS, the Doctor's like, "Who are you?" "Clara, be more specific." He's pretending to have forgotten her. And that is just the most wonderful foreshadowing to the fun, to Hellbent, of course, when the Doctor forgets Clara. And I hadn't noticed that until recently. I just think that's see, once you see the whole series, that just makes that such a brilliant scene. That he doesn't realise that he's foreshadowing what it's going to be like for him in a few episodes' time. And I just think that's such a lovely scene. Well, that whole scene of the TARDIS is wonderful, really. I think it's sort of another great moment because... And it shows that the Doctor misses Clara, really. And he says, "I've missed you, Clara, as well." And I think that's really nice to see how much he cares for her and how much he misses her when she's not around. And so obviously that sort of leads towards the finale of how he can't cope with her not being around. That I think that's sort of nice to see that in this episode as well. And of course we get Clara's Raven necklace. There's another hint to the end of the series, and Clara's going to have to face the Raven, and we see the necklace is already representing that. And I feel like, I'm sure someone's seen that comment that like she's been wearing Raven necklaces since like series 7 or something. And I think that's true, and that'd be a nice link up to her demise essentially. Sort of, it's always been planned throughout the tenure that she'd die by a raven, obviously, and that's why they had the Raven necklace throughout. So clearly, just a happy coincidence, I guess. So that's another nice little nod to the end of the series. And it was interesting that this was a Clara Light episode, which is. We haven't seen that much of really through through any of her stories. There's been very few that have only had like a couple of minutes of her. So this was one of them. Clearly, as I've said, she's underused in the series. And although I can accept it in this episode because it was meant to be a Clara Light episode, and she sort of kind of had a reason, an excuse to just push her to the side. So, but I guess it's because they wanted to focus on the Doctor and Ashildr, and I guess having Clara in there as well just kind of. Well, where does Clara fit into that storyline, frankly? There isn't anywhere for her to be, so I think it made sense to not have her in it. Otherwise, because there's no point in putting her in just as a filler character just because they have to. They won't have a reason for her to be in there, so I think that it was probably beneficial not to have her in there, because of course then she plays 2 characters for the next 2 weeks, so she goes all out on that episode to make up for missing out on one, if you like. And one last thing, of course, is we get the image of Ashildr in the background, in that little selfie that Clara has with one of the kids or something. I can't remember the exact reasoning, but yeah, giving that little hint to the future episodes that Ashildr's going to be back, and clearly something bad is going to happen because Ashildr's going to be back and she turns bad and all this kind of stuff. And so yeah, I think it was fairly thinking back, it wasn't a surprise that she was going to be in episode 10. I remember it was announced fairly between The Woman Who Lived and Faith the Raven. It was announced that she was in it, I remember, so I was kind of not surprised by that. But I didn't know she'd be in Hellbent until we saw the flipping trailer. Why did they do that? And why did they chuck? I mean, that would have been a great reveal if they hadn't put me in the trailer for Hellbent. They give her one shot. Why waste that surprise? I mean, that was so poor with the trailers wasting surprises this series. But they just seemed unnecessary to throw that in. Why don't they just sort of stick to shots of the Gallifrey sort of thing and a few monsters and stuff? Why don't they keep that as a surprise? Because no one knew about that until... I don't think, maybe I'm completely wrong, but I'm fairly sure we didn't know that she'd... of course you could guess she probably would be, but you didn't know for sure that she'd be in the episode until that trailer, and it could have been until halfway through the episode when she appears, and that would have been so much better. So that's disappointing from the BBC team, yes again. But there you go. That's kind of irrelevant to this episode, isn't it? Because it has 6 episodes time. Quite a fair way to go till we get there, don't we? Well, this has been a fairly rapid review. I think I have no idea of the concept of how long has passed since I started this. I'm fairly sure it feels a fair bit shorter than previous ones, so maybe prefer them this sort of length, which I could, and if you do, I can probably try and cut them down, but sometimes I just like to talk about an episode a lot because I like them. Whereas this one, I thought it was very much an average, sort of, literally your bog standard average 7 out of 10 tops. Sort of somewhere between 6.5 and 7 out of 10. It's just not that exciting. Yes, it's got the nice character study bit, which is interesting, but not exciting. And then it has the pretty poor lion plot that's just a bit meh, and really doesn't interest me or excite me at all, really. So that's why I'd say in a rewatch, this is a very enjoyable episode. Watching it part of series 9 with the girl who died, it can be very enjoyable. and have to watch, but it's not one that I'm going to jump back and watch, go out of my way to watch sort of in a hurry on its own. I think it's very much one of the episodes that you watch in a marathon, but rarely do out of a marathon, I think. And so that's why it's just a fairly standard 7 out of 10. So there we go, that's pretty much all there is to say about this episode. Remember to like the video and subscribe if you're new here. Comment on what you thought of this episode, whether you thought it was alright or not so good. Well, I won't say it this week, but that's been pretty much it for this video. So remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you hopefully next week for another Doctor Who review. Bye.